Hello and welcome back to Starblade's Designing a World series. This will be the final episode from our bottom-up development of our setting. What we've already done is create the two main countries of our world. The Iron Coast, a city of dwarves in the east for the most part, and Vagash, a confederacy of goblinoid races to the west, with a mountain range that divides the world in half. We've introduced high fantasy to the setting and created some of the early plot points and NPCs for the players to interact with. For this finale of Bottom Up, we'll finally be figuring out some of the metaphysics and the gods that are in the setting and put a soft cap on just how long this theoretical campaign will last. Tonight on Playing God. I'm Nick Logie, hosting over here with Xander. I don't have to count tile spaces, Nolan.
Hey, man.
So this is by no means where you'd have to stop building your world with the bottom-up method, because you could just keep using this method to construct as much or as little as you'd like, which is why I prefer bottom-up. By the time you get to the broad setting details, you can extrapolate what they should be based on what you've already made. Xander, how do you decide what sorts of universal laws exist within your setting?
Well, the universal laws that I apply is definitely determined on what the flavor of the setting is be. A lot of the times, what system that I'm going to be playing in. But the general strokes are whether or not to allow gods that are existing, uh, a- they interact with the world or not. How do the laws of physics apply, if anything? Get to that point. But the general gist is when I create a world, I typically use top down, but I would create a pantheon specific to the world that I'm going to be playing in and make those decisions as I go along. And you could take something that has been involved with your world and make it no longer, or take something that hasn't had any effect on the world and apply it later on. So either way you slice it, either bottom up or top down, you definitely have the option, put a lot of different spins on things and alter things to go along. But atypically, I use the real world as a template where a lot of things are.
Yeah, starting out with using real life as a template is a pretty good way to start that process. I typically go about it by thinking about what is going to be prevalent in my campaign and then maybe just not care about the details if it's not even going to be a thing that anybody's going to interact with, or maybe like jot a note down to maybe remind myself to do it later. But generally, I think of what are the underlying operations that the universe has. Like you mentioned, actual laws of physics, but this also applies to
Yeah.
like gods, magic, etc. So in most games, you'll come across magic is a thing that's in the setting. Usually, it's already intrinsically written in the documentation of the rule books themselves. But how it actually operates on the metaphysical level could change and vary depending on what you want it to do. Such as the weave is how Forgotten Realms explains how magic works. There's like an invisible web of like all the magic possible, and you basically just adjust the configuration of it to do what you want. That might not be the same in your setting, even if it is still Dungeons and Dragons, or even if you're using the rest of the Forgotten Realms setting as well. A lot of it's just based on what you think is important enough to write out.
Another good way of going about whether or not magic and how it works is to use the radiation method, where you assign different plot points along your map, and from those points is where magic is accessed. Closer you are to that point, more powerful magic becomes, and it can radiate outward in ever widening circle. But that gives the opportunity to have some dead spots where the weave is a little less forgiving where that's concerned. You can have completely magic dead zones where even a cantrip or prestidigitation just won't work because the very laws that make up how magic operates, how you draw that energy, is not present.
You could actually, even if you're doing like a post apocalyptic game, you could actually use radiation itself as the magic source.
Oh yeah,
Instead of just
that
having magic act like a radiation, you could just have radiation be the magic.
yeah.
That's how it is in Deadlands.
Every single spellcaster growing an extra arm out of their face. Been around radiation so long.
Hey man, when you play a radiation priest in the Wasted West, one of the first things you do in character creation is you draw for a mutation. And it could be either really good, such as your strength goes up, Or it could be actually, I think there's a way to die in character creation or get really
Oh,
close to
gross.
death. Like, yeah, you only have like like your legs left after you're done with this character creation. There's some really bad stuff. One of the lines in the book actually says, "If they draw this, have fun with that, GM." And then it says, "Ha ha ha," in the book. It's you're basically coming up with big categories of things that are important to your setting. So one of
Yeah.
these things is the actual physical laws that kind of like physics we have in real life. These are like how would the normal person interact with the world?
Does gravity pull you down at a set speed like it does on Earth, like 9 per second squared, I think it is? Does gravity exist only on this plane, or does it exist elsewhere? How does it work? All the way up to the speed of light. Is it relevant? Not relevant. How does your world interact with the way our world works with things? The way magic interact with the rest of the physical world, it breaks those laws, which is why magic is so completely fantastic, really analyze what it does. But the rest of the people who aren't spellcasters still have to ascribe to, like gravity is pulling them down. They can only run so far, jump so high, and all those things. You have to figure out and set a precedent, because your players are going to be expecting that the world that they're going to be role playing in is likely going to be like the real world in that they can only carry so much and they can run so fast because the laws apply. But you can also use that to advantage if you want to, at a late date, change something minor like gravity double in this zone area. So now your characters move half as fast, their speed is cut in half. They can only carry half of their objects. Jumping, they only have their half of their normal vertical horizontal jump, and things like that. And you can play with it and help them to appreciate the gravity pun
Ha
there.
ha 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 ha.
The gravity of the situation, find themselves. Something as simple as altering how gravity works can make an entire campaign a little bit more hardy and hard to deal with, especially if you make it only for a small area where they have to interact with it and don't have any other options.
Or going to the complete contradiction of your consistent laws of physics on your world, you could also just completely fuck around with what's going on and have different variations of gravity within a singular plane or a singular planet. And part of this whole like process of making this entire setting from the bottom up is we are going to here in a little bit actually discuss what's out in the cosmos, or if there's even a cosmos to begin with. So that's kind of like we all know how physics works, not really like maybe the maths per se, but we understand it on an intrinsic level because we have to live in it. A lot of games already have this kind of system in mind when they're designing them, which is why Dungeons and Dragons has fall damage based on d6s with a maximum that that can exist. Because at a certain point, then you no longer accelerate through gravity because there's enough resistance and all that. But
Yeah.
maybe you decide that you don't want to cap on fall damage limits, and you can just keep accelerating until no matter how powerful you are, you instantly die when you hit the ground. And that's something to think about.
Hmm.
If that's important to you, if especially if your players are going to be doing a lot of climbing, I guess. Let's go beyond just the basic physical laws. Let's talk about the full metaphysics. Let's talk about how our magic in the system's setting is going to operate. Um, what kind of we already have high fantasy in here, so we definitely
Yeah.
got the magic. But how does it operate?
Well, because we have such high magic, it stands to reason that individuals would probably flock to points of magical, like a magical nexus, so to speak.
Well, so
Uh,
I think you're already a little too far ahead for what we're deciding, because we don't. Where's the source of magic come from? Because I could make a setting where the
ah,
source of magic comes from within. Like you don't have to find a font of magic because you are that font. Maybe that's how
ooh,
consciousness works. Maybe you're just you are your spirit or whatever is a magical thing that inhabits a physical body for the duration of your life, and then once you die from whatever reason, then your magic passes on from the physical form, maybe disperses out into the world or goes into an afterlife even.
That's actually that actually sounds kind of fun. It sounds kind of interesting.
So
That would
I mean
make
that
detect
could
magic
explain the high
easier.
magic because if
Yeah.
everybody, like everyone who's ever born is intrinsically magical, even if you can't control it to to exert your will onto the rest of the world, like by chucking fireballs or whatever, then
Yeah.
that could also explain how maybe there's a lot of magical devices that are around where in if this were in like the real world, you'd have to operate them from batteries or something along those lines. But maybe your electric watch or your magic watch in Dungeons and Dragons, maybe that's powered by your own magic that you're bleeding off like radiation from your skin, and it's just incorporating that into the power function.
I mean, like kind of how the body heat watches work.
Yeah,
Like they constantly work off of your pulse or something like that. That actually sounds kind of cool.
yeah, it's like that, except instead of like your pulse or your heat, it's operating off magic. I mean, since we're talking about metaphysics, we could say heat is magic. I mean, at some point you could say everything is magic, but we're gonna not go that far. We want a tangible world that players can interact with, not some weird spirit voodoo that everybody's like, I don't understand what's happening ever.
Nobody ever understands what's going on. It's magic. That's the explanation.
That actually is a good explanation for if you're doing Fey stuff, but we're not
Yeah.
doing Fey stuff in this because we haven't established any of it thus far. So it doesn't seem to be very important to our setting, at least.
Hmm.
So Xander, how do you want magic to operate? Like, do you want it to be an intrinsic thing, or do you want it to have like there are points where what produces the magic, or is it just there?
I think that considering this is a high fantasy and high magic setting that we've already kind of came up with so far, that every being has an intrinsic magical property to them, and that lifts the opportunities to do some pretty interesting and cool stuff with it. Also, the way like detect magic would work, like you could, in theory, if you cast like detect magic at a level 4 instead of the level 2 spell that it is, I think it's a level 2 spell. But you could actually see where someone had just walked through and follow their footprints because there's a latent magicness to where they just stepped. So that could also be fun.
Yeah,
So
you
I think
could. That would
maybe, yeah.
get a good twist on some of those divination spells, where instead of like looking at what's real through the eyes of a magical lens. Instead, you're looking at what is magic through a magical lens.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think the an entity being intrinsically magical would be fun.
All right, so we'll say that all living creatures have inherent magic.
Could also explain why the big bad guy is doing stuff that he's doing because he can suck the magic out of you.
Oh yeah, I mean, like that's a classic lich move to steal souls to power an undead army. But why stop at undead? Why just not siphon people's magic out and then use it to I don't know, power like some big weapon or some kind of I don't know, some kind of kaiju.
Or just make the water pump in his house work.
Yeah, I guess that could work too. That's kind of gives me a Flintstones vibe though. Like he has some kind of pterodactyl that like, sticks its head out of the wall and then like starts pecking at
Spitting.
this pump that like actually starts pumping the water. But I know what you mean. That was just like the first thing
Yeah.
I thought of. Just like just pointless use of magic.
Yeah, it's pointless use of evil. It doesn't have to. Evil doesn't have to have a point. It just has to be evil.
That's
It's
true. I don't
very.
really could just have that the true definition of chaos. Just like fuck it, whatever. I don't care. I'm gonna kill an entire town so I can make sure that my jacuzzi is powered for a year.
Sounds like something Doofenshmirtz would do. It's like the tri-state area.
All right, so we know how like where magic comes from.
Yeah.
One question to ask, especially when it comes to like what you want to have in your game itself, is to what extent will the players be interacting with this magic, or do you even have access to everything? Um, like quickly because we've mentioned this a lot in Legends of Latir. Then originally resurrection magic or coming back from the dead at all, no matter what, was considered like impossible. And I went so far to kind of hint that you probably don't even want to take those spells like early on. Like I actually did go so far as to say you can't just like when you hit level 5 or whatever, you can't just take revivify or whatever it is. You can't even
Yeah,
just take
Revivify.
revivify because like that doesn't work. People don't know how that works yet. So if you pick that without having gone through the steps beforehand in order to set up the fact that you are even doing this, like learning this reviving magic, then I would just say it just doesn't work. I don't care what the rules say. Don't take the spell. Get something different.
Yeah, but yeah, our bard decided to say, "All right, I'll
She
just do
worked
all the
for over a
research."
year out of play to
Yes, she
get
did.
that shit working and get resurrection in the setting.
Yes, she did.
And
She busted her ass for it.
that's when you could start taking those spells, like
Yep.
in
And you
that
got to
setting
learn it from her
specifically.
because she's the only one that really knows.
Yeah, that's right. That's what she's dealing with right now. Everybody's like, "Wait a minute, what do you mean you could bring people back from the dead? You tell us how that works. I want to know,
I really want to know. Like the king of space was like, dude,
bruh."
can you show us? Because we don't fucking know. We've got giant spaceships and we have no idea how to bring people back from the dead.
Yeah, I mean, technology could go as out of control as you want it to, but like maybe you can't bring people back from the dead. Like that's kind of a thing. That's like a thing in Shadowrun, despite how great the
Yeah.
technology is, despite how great the magic is. Like
Yeah.
you can't bring people back
Once you're dead, you're dead. I
with
know.
some
One of my
very expensive dock wagon exceptions. But even then, like if you get blown up or some shit, they're not really putting you back together.
Nah, you can't sew consciousness back into a cadaver in Shadowrun. It just doesn't work that way.
What I'm getting at here after all this is that since it's your setting, you can do whatever you want. Like if it makes zero sense in real life, as long as it's consistent and something that players can count on in your setting, then that's fine to put it in. Don't just
Yeah.
arbitrarily change metaphysics at the drop of a hat. Like if somebody jumps off a cliff that's 100 feet and the maximum damage according to the book is like 10d6. But then then somebody else falls 150 feet, but you give more damage even though there's a cap. That's an inconsistency that is going to
Yeah.
not sit well with the table. Um,
Yeah.
but if you go into
Once
it like at the start and just say, "Hey, there's no cap to fall damage, so don't fall."
Yeah, don't fall. That curb over there is deadly. Uh, but when you're thinking about whatever it is that you want to do and how you want to alter the rules of the world, consistency is key. But also keep in mind that thinking about things from a GM's perspective, when you're creating a world and when you're creating the the entirety of a setting, there are a lot of things that you're going to have to think about and have to think about where the long term is concerned. Because if you have certain things that operate within your world that alter it even slightly from what is considered normal, there has to be a dedicated, written down rule setting set that you have created that sort of explains this that you can draw back upon at a later date. Because this is why it's so important to take notes as a GM whenever you make these kinds of rule calls, because something can change, but it has to have a reason to change, and something can be a certain way, but having a good reason behind it will do more than the "well, I said so" explanation. As a GM, you want to give your players a little bit more than just this is how I wanted it to be. If you have a legit kind of reasoning behind it, they're going to be more on board. That's to say, you can, and I have before said, look, I'm the game master. That's just how it works, bro. Like
I mean,
you can
at some
card it if
point,
you need to.
at some point, you're trying to make something that doesn't exist. So, like, for instance, if I ever actually manage to run a Starfinder game like I want to, then one of the things that I don't want to deal with is relativity. So, you know what's not in the system or the setting? Relativity. Now, I can't explain why that is because honestly, I don't really know enough about relativity in real life to really explain how that works. But that's kind of comes down to it. doesn't bring fun to the game, the way I'm imagining this game playing out in the long term, is that it just won't be relevant. I don't even want the players to try to jank physics to like get around doing certain things or whatever. And it's not really something that anybody really needs to think about. So no matter where you are in the universe, no matter if you're 5 feet away from a black hole or if you are, I don't know, where like on a tiny body of mass, like your time is passing at the same rate just
Yeah,
because I
it
said
doesn't
so.
change. Adding like grander physical and physics laws to your games can be fun, but uh,
If it's not going to be important or you
if it's
don't
not going to be
care about
important,
it, then just go with the default,
yeah,
like
just
Xander
don't
does.
yeah, don't deal with it too much.
Because Xander,
Um,
the part that you care more about, you don't really care so much about like the physics and all that in term or the metaphysics in terms of how it interplays with like reality. You care more about getting to like I want like these gods and this
yeah.
pantheon that's in here that are doing
Hmm.
all this stuff. I want like the cosmos to be arrayed like this.
Yeah.
Or you could also make decisions like what shape do the planes come in? Like if you
Hmm.
looked at if you have multiple planes, how would you look at the actual representation of that like visually?
Yeah.
In the fifth edition core rulebook, it actually has kind of a diagram that shows like the little material planes in the center, and then it expands outward, kind of like in like different circles that are in within this like sphere of existence, and then eventually it gets out to like the abyss and like the huge metaphysical afterlives that
Yeah. The
your players might
hell.
not interact with depending on what kind of game you're running.
Yeah. The defaults for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition is kind of fun and it takes some of the guesswork out of it. But when you create a system and a setting, whether you're doing it, bottom up or top down, these are things that could invariably have a huge impact on your game if you don't want your characters to stay local. And even if they do stay local, not everybody comes from the same place. So you can add things in later on that come from places that are unnatural. So having a flame elemental that comes from the plane of fire, uh, if your player characters, like the characters that exist in the world, had never seen a flame elemental, they have no idea what the plane of fire even is, no mage has ever explained it to them, nobody knows, that's going to be a huge shock. And if your players, even especially if they're new players, you're like, all right, what the fuck is a flame elemental, and where the hell is the plane of fire? Like, how come I've never heard of this? uh, Having these kind of hard rules set before you begin your campaign means that even if you do want to add something in later on, you have a place and a backup and a good explanation for it. So you're not just throwing things in there and seeing what kind of sticks like you do pasta to a wall. You have a reason and a rhyme for doing things. And as a GM, one of the things you got to think about is how are my players going to interact with these things? If they aren't, it's not important.
And you
If
could
they are, build it.
Yeah, and you could come back to it later and change what you
Oh
need to
yeah.
do. So this has happened to every GM. It does, and this isn't even just in regards to like rules or even just like the laws of physics or whatever.
Mhm.
This is a player has an idea or tries to do something in the game that you have to stop and be like, "Oh, wait a second! I never expected something like that to happen."
Oh
And
my
you
god.
what a solution to this, which it seems baffling to me that not more people do this, but like you could straight up say, "Okay, I actually didn't think of this," and you say this to your players at the table, like, "I didn't see this coming." And you rule it like you would kind of like a rules disagreement. Like I don't
Mhm.
really know what it should be right now because I can't just make this up in 30 seconds on the spot. But here's how it's going to be temporarily, and then I'll think more on this and come up with a more fleshed out thing.
Actually, it's a really, really good thing. I've always just tried to kind
That's
of
why I'm
wing it.
baffled that nobody does it more because like you're sitting at a table with your friends, like they should be able to understand that you aren't actually God, even though you're playing one, and
Yeah.
be able to just be like, okay, yeah, that's fine. Like we'll do it this way for now, and then next game, if if we try this again and you've decided that it really shouldn't be working this way, then we'll deal with that later. I do. I mean, I'd totally give that pass to a GM as a player every time.
Yeah, like I don't know why that's never actually even ever occurred to me because every single moment where a player presents some things like that, I've like done improv and practicality lessons, and I build my worlds from top down. Uh, and I create my worlds in such a way that I can run 50, 60, 70 campaigns out of it and never touch all of the stuff that I've created. So I generally have an answer for questions like that, but it does come up where I don't fucking know and I've got to make
Yeah,
some shit up on the spot. Usually I do okay with it, but sometimes it gets a little jank.
yeah,
So
it really does.
yeah,
I mean, here's
sometimes
a
it's not
couple real
so working.
examples from Latier that you played in is when Karks wanted to know about the the opinion of one of the gods in regards to morally resurrecting people versus like making constructs like undead out of them. And
You're like,
I didn't think about that beforehand. I straight up said I have to take some time to figure this out because that I just don't know.
but
And
I'll give you
and
an
it was
answer
fine.
eventually.
Or like the or even like this rules call where Meepo was trying to use the gaseous potion to turn into a gas himself and then like go into an enemy's lungs and then like cancel the spell. That was one of the ones where there had to be a decision on the fly, but I did preface this by saying,
Yeah,
okay, this is probably going to change because I don't know if this is actually how it should work. But instead of staring and reading the book for 10 minutes, I'm just going to go ahead and let that happen. Now,
yeah,
after the fact, then I mean, I don't regret letting it happen, but thinking
because it
about
was
it
cool.
later, I was like, yeah, I shouldn't have let that happen. It shouldn't have been a thing. Like you're using a potion of like a third level spell to do something that ninth level spells need to be able to do. So
Yeah,
if you can't have a spell that insta kills somebody at third level, then the gaseous potion trick doesn't work at third level either.
actually, I think the strangulation is technically a 10th level spell,
I'm not
but
talking
that
about
goes into
strangulation. See, the thing was, when you cancel the gaseous spell in somebody's lungs, you reform into your physical properties.
yeah,
So you effectively just appear inside somebody's being, which blows them up from the inside. Because,
effectively,
yeah,
yeah.
it's not really strangulation, it's more like insta-giving. It'd be like casting power word kill at somebody.
Yeah, you you can look into like different spells like that, but yeah, that kind of thing. Whenever a player does that, because I have had a very similar situation where a player had made themselves so innumerously tiny that they started attempting to try and affect the immune system of an enemy that they were fighting. And they had the ability to kind of draw other things towards them using weird magic and stuff like that from the setting that I had created.
Mm-hmm.
And they took it really far and eventually gave the guy what amounts to the flu that was based entirely off of his own actions within the guy's body during this particular little adventure because he was a dick and he wanted him to die of the flu. And there's no means by which to cure something like, a person made flu in this setting. So that was a really crazy couple of episodes. And the thing that kind of got away with it was the fact that all of the other player characters were also doing it too. So it kind of was like, they're all in his bloodstream, effectively doing a freaking Miss Frazzle and or Frizzle Magic School Bus shit. So I guess that's okay. But I never in ever in the ever that I've ever thought that my players were going to Magic School Bus me and turn themselves into tiny little things to try and kill somebody that they just couldn't kill any other way. And I gave him experience for it. They killed the motherfucker. He died of the flu. But it was insane. Just like, all right, we can't hit him. We can't sneak up on him. We can't, bomb him from the atmosphere. We've used every spell. We've used every attack that we could possibly think of. Let's make him sick.
Well, I mean, like, it
Wait,
sounds
what?
like they exhaust all the other options. Like, at a certain point, like, you can't blame the players for just trying something really fucking crazy because if nothing else is working, then you only
Yeah,
have the crazy options left.
yeah, that's true. The issue
Though you could have
was
had what you could have done is you could have made an entire dungeon within this guy's blood vessels and have them fight like giant bacteria or
yeah,
viruses. That
yeah,
viruses are usually still small enough that even though they even though these players are microscopic, the viruses could probably still infect them.
oh yeah, probably. I just had basically white blood cells and stuff like that that they were having to deal with. I had to write a stat card for a white blood cell.
I
I had
mean,
to write a stat card for a fucking white blood cell, Nick.
I just use a
It was
gelatinous
insane.
cube and then have it jiggle faster.
Oh, I actually didn't consider that. It's a pretty good idea.
I mean, it seems like an ooze to me. Just make it a little less oozy and more solid, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
I've never
The
been like the size of a white blood cell, so I don't know how that would interact.
Yeah, basically what happened was they weren't supposed to interact with this bad guy until they were about 10th or 11th level, and they were only 4th level. So what they did was they pooled all of their resources, talked to uh, a local wizard who had 9th level spells, and they managed to convince him and me somehow as the GM to allow them to use magic to become innumerably tiny and then inject it into this guy's food where he ate them and then they began their adventure
I
and they killed
mean,
him. That
dude,
was
this sounds pretty fun to me. Like if
it
you're
was a
looking
lot of
at if
fun.
you're
It was
looking at this like from a regret standpoint, then the first thing I would do is not have a ninth level like a anything that could cast ninth level spells even interacting with fourth level people, and then
yeah.
like at all. Uh,
I actually don't regret it at all, and I applaud the
I mean,
players for
that's what I
coming up
didn't
with
think
this
so.
shit.
That's why I wasn't trying to like come up with solutions for anything because it sounded like this
Yeah,
is how it was like how it should
I
have
just kind
gone
of
and how
let
it
it
was
go.
fun.
I just kind of let it go because it was a lot of fun. They really enjoyed it, and it's still one of the best adventures that some of the players tell me like on a regular basis. Like, dude, that was so fun. I can't remember, what my character's name was, but I remember turning into really really tiny and infecting the big bad guy and killing him. So yeah, I
I
mean,
mean,
I
if
just
everyone
let it
has
go,
fun, sounds
but
great.
I was not expecting that shit. That's for damn sure.
So let's get back to our world.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so you want to talk gods? What gods we have in the setting, Xander? You're the god man.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of things you have to consider whenever you're thinking about gods slash demigods, and whether or not you want demigods to even be a thing. Uh, Demigods, for most purposes, are a god plus a mortal equals demigod, that kind of deal.
Hercules.
Uh,
There's your example.
Hercules is a demigod. Um, but whenever you come up with gods, think about something for your world that would make sense. Do you base it on the races? Are they, a
Are
moral
they
code?
gods
Is
of something or are they
Yeah.
omnipotent beings?
Is it like do you do a pantheon that's much like the Greeks in that they have the god of blah, the god of blah, and the god of blah, or is it like do you have a single god, just one, all knowing, all seeing, all everythingy being
Or you could
that
just set it based on
exists?
planes, so like maybe the gods in this plane of existence don't transfer over to another plane of its existence, so they don't have powers over there.
Oh, that's kind of fun. Like a god that operates in the plane of fire comes to the mortal plane and is like, yeah, what the fuck?
Well, it's like
Oh no.
maybe since like he's from the plane of fire, he could still like control fire in the material plane, but he can't do the shit that he normally would be able to do in the plane of fire because everything is fire in the plane of fire effectively, I guess. Then he can control everything. But since not everything is just fire or fire based out in the material world, then maybe he could still do like ninth level fire spells at a whim. But if
Yeah,
he needs to
he's
do
still a
anything else, he's
badass
got to roll like you do.
like everybody else.
Or alternatively, one more example for like just kind of an out of the box thing. Any Cthulhu kind of gods where
Ooh,
it's like
yeah,
they're either here already and have just not cared for a long time or been asleep, or maybe
on their way.
they're on their way or they're extra like fully completely alien like You have like your planar circle that has all the little bubbles of all the planes and stuff in it, and these gods aren't from that. They're from outside of that. How do you? And they
Yeah,
just don't care about any of your rules because they don't have to follow them.
yeah. Whenever you're creating gods and pantheons, think to yourself, is this going to be relevant? Now, when I say relevant, I mean, do the gods interact with the mortal plane in a realistic, observable, measurable way, or do they not? And
Are you talking
you
about
can,
whether or not the gods are actually real or not?
uh, well, they could be real
Because
and
what I
just not give a
what
fuck.
because what I was the thing that I immediately thought of was like you would put a god in if it was relevant for like a big city that worships this god, regardless of
Mhm.
whether or not it actually exists.
Yeah. And now you got to determine whether or not those people exist. Now, because our setting is what it is, we're not necessarily required to make sure that paladins and clerics have to have a god by which they get their power from. It just comes from their faith in that god, whether they be real or not. So it still comes from themselves, but you don't necessarily even have to make gods for this particular setting, or just a name and this is their story, but not ever have to actually interact with them.
Or like with this, since we've in our setting decided that all creatures have inherent magic, then you can
Mhm.
explain the different classes just by having that as a template. So
Yeah.
instead of clerics like pulling power from a deity, then maybe this is just the way for the cleric to basically pray for the deity to do something through them. And so it's not it's like you are a vessel to channel the power out of, or even just amplify your own power.
Hmm.
Wizards could just they could study this inherent magic and be like, ah, yes, I see. Ah, the formula for being able to do this thing comes from like the chakra points in two places within my sternum or something along those lines. And the sorcerers,
Yeah.
they don't understand it, but they can do it.
They can just do that shit. Wild magic, rah! Wild magic is terrifying in fifth edition, just so you guys know. It is so off the wall, balls awful crazy if you get a freaking wild mage. They just
What's the point? Wild
I
mages aren't
know.
supposed to have order. They're supposed to spice things up because it's chaotic.
Jesus. We had somebody that cast a spell, rolled badly on the table, and ended up becoming a potted plant and was carried around by the barbarian for 2 games. Could do nothing, but was just a potted plant. I think it was a fern of some kind. That he was just carrying it around. It's like, what's that fern? This is my friend, the blah 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 blah. She's a great wizard.
Oh,
All
it's your
right, you
friend,
crazy
or is
bastard.
it the greatest spy in the universe? Plot
Oh,
the fern down into a meeting of like some syndicate that's underground, and they're like, I don't remember that plant over there, and then everybody else is
oh
like,
well,
huh,
it's just a
whatever.
plant.
Let's keep talking about this highly criminal thing we're doing.
Yeah, yeah, it was crazy. Carried around a freaking potted fern for like 2 games. It was so funny.
But with the gods, so
Yeah,
we're not only thinking about what they're based off of and how they're like how I guess they're powered and what they do, but
yeah,
you're also figuring out what they represent. Like,
yeah.
do they have certain moral codes that they follow? Do they stick to the alignment system if you're using an alignment system?
Alignment systems can be a little wonky from time to time. I've noticed in my experience that when you have gods that are based on like the alignment system, like for fifth edition D&D, good, neutral, good, evil, blah blah blah. Um, when you have those, it limits some of the things that the players can do instead of making it more fluid. And
But
it
that might be the
also
point, my friend.
that could be the point. But also, you have to add uh, other things to also add to that. So they're
What kind of
the god of the
restrictions are you
sun and
talking
moon.
about, though? Can you give us an example?
When you think about a god, let's say from fifth edition, they will only act within a certain realm of like alignment. They will only do things for people, and they will only do things that are of a lawful good, whatever their alignment chosen is. When you have gods that are much more flexible, they can do more. say a god of the forest can do something really evil to humans but is good for the forest. So it's just a matter of perspective, and it allows for more flexibility.
Okay, okay.
But when thinking about having a god, you also have to think about the other side of that coin. Are there deities that are inherently not good? Because when people think gods, they think, oh, they're the good guys. They're the people rooting for the good guys. Well, gods in role playing games aren't always good.
Even gods in history
Aren't
might
always good.
not be
Yeah.
all that great. I mean, let's take a look at the Greek and the Roman gods. Like
Oh yeah.
they were basically just they were just people pretty much. That
Yeah.
like they had flaws, they fucked things up, or in Zeus's case, he just fucked things.
A lot of things.
Yeah, like you could have flawed characteristics within your deities,
Hmm.
or maybe if you don't, maybe even if you have an alignment system that the universe has to follow, maybe the gods don't. Maybe
Ooh,
you have
nice.
a like chaotic question mark god of the forest.
Hmm. Well, that's a good way to spin it. But when you're getting ready to determine this, ask yourself whether or not they're going to interact with your players, and are they going to become relevant? When they are, or if they do, what kind of abilities do they have? What can they do? Do they just do fireballs like the guy that comes from the plane of fire, or do they have magic that isn't restricted by the classic spells? Can they just do something? That's also a really good question to kind of get yourself the understanding of why these things are different than mortals. Because someone who has ninth level spells is a monster
I mean, you
to
could
deal with.
consider them being pretty much a demigod at that
Yeah,
point.
they're pretty much demigods, but your gods are so much further beyond that. And they should be.
That's the
They
way
should
I
be
look at
untouchable.
things. Yeah, that's the way I look at things. Don't give gods a health bar, like uh,
Nope.
because then it looks like you might be able to win. I mean, if you're having your god set up that you can overcome them, because certain settings and certain stories have that as part of like the
Oh
main
yeah.
plot. But if you're like if you're Elminster and you walk up to the Plane of Fire guy and you're like, fuck you, and then Elminster starts fighting him, then like the level of disparity should just be like, are you serious, bro? And then the fire god like snaps his fingers, and then Elminster just all of his molecules turn to fire. Like
Yeah,
it should
he's
be
just
that
dust now.
level of like you just can't step to this.
No.
And that's the way I usually approach it.
Hmm.
But because generally I don't want anybody trying to get the gods to solve their problems because this is a game about solving problems. Um, and you don't want to have like them just be able to hand wave a bunch of shit either. So
Yeah.
you could also have a reason why the gods, even if they are a tangible thing, maybe they do or don't intervene directly, and you can kind of explain why that is if you need to. So an idea that I've had for one of my settings is there are, however many gods they are, they exist. They give power to the people in the material plane, all that normal stuff. But they can't intervene directly with anything because they are constantly fighting each other in the heavens. So the god of evil and the god of good, they stalemate. So they neither of them can intervene directly, but small fragments of their power splinter off and head into the material plane, which small fragments for them are titanic fragments effectively for the material plane
Oh
people.
yeah.
So like the god of good, like a small fragment of power, finds itself in the material plane, and that's how clerics are powered for that
Yeah.
god.
That small, tiny little bit.
But if he ever tried to intervene directly, then let's say the god of good tries resurrecting an army of clerics that fell to some superpowered thing that isn't associated with another god, then maybe the evil god's like, well, hold on a minute. I like that giant overpowered thing that slaughtered all those dudes. I fuck you, other dude, and then they're just clashing at each other, and nothing gets done.
No, nothing ever comes to fruition. Another way that you could explain whether or not or how your gods can interact is by very simply making their abilities and their powers can have reach, but when they themselves are not within a certain parameter, their powers are muted. Like if you have, say, a neutral good goddess of the forest, she doesn't go to the forest, but she can. She can appear as an apparition before a ranger to give him a quest to help save her forest,
Or guide
but
him
she
out
can't
of
actually do anything.
right, or guide him out of the forest after he's been
Yeah.
lost after scrapping his way out of a dungeon.
Like she can't actually raise her hand and do anything. She probably couldn't even touch anything there. Just an ephemeral form can appear before people, but she can gift her power from where she's standing. But she has to stay near this thing, and that's how she gains her powers. That's also a really good way that if you want to do an epic like magic campaign where some of your players could in theory become epic tier, and where the cap is for 20 for like Dungeons and Dragons, once you go beyond that you can become a god, and that gives you a place to put them, and it gives them a means by which to interact with the world, but they're taken away from it now. They can't do anything more.
Or maybe there's just a reason why that the gods choose to be hands off.
Yeah,
So
that's also
this
true.
actually came up in Latir when you guys were trying to figure out how to stop an army from winning, and you were like, what? One of you guys was like, why don't we just go to Skull, the god of war? Like he's we know he's powerful. He's actually fought alongside us a couple times. And then you thought about it and you realized like, well, wait a second. He actually wouldn't want to help us in this case because we're
Because
pretty evenly matched between this army and our army, and if he helps and he wins the war, then there's no more war. So he doesn't get to.
he wants the war.
Yeah, he's the god of war. He just wants the war. It doesn't matter which side is right. Like your side might be right, but he might not want to help you because that would, even if he's not explicitly evil, like he's neutral in my setting, then
Yeah.
that would just stop the war, and then nobody would be fighting. And then what's the point?
hmm So when choosing your gods, you can have them based on races, moral codes, mixtures of the two. You can have them hands-on, hand by choice, or by some extra planar issue that they can't get beyond. But at the end of the day, uh, if you're going to have a campaign, you are probably going to have to introduce gods or goddesses at some point in time, simply because faith and religion is a main driving force of just about every single society that's ever been, and that is unfortunately a product of its own kind of hubris, and you have to create it even if you don't agree with it, because society requires that it's there even if it doesn't do anything. So keeping those kinds of things in mind when you're creating a world, you're not just creating a bunch of people on a rock spinning around really fast, or a bunch of people on a little disc that's
Well,
held up by
that's what we're
elephants.
about to get into. In fact, like how
Yeah.
do we even have planets, or these? Is this one
Uh,
spinning disc? Does this have?
mhm.
Are there stars even? Like,
Yeah. Just keep those things in mind because you're building a society too. But since it got brought up, is there space, and can it be the place
it
that you can
usually
go?
is when it's my game.
Yes, I know. I should have fucking expected that we would go to space,
No, I
but
had to
for
work
some
really hard to
reason,
make sure that you specifically weren't suspecting that we were going to space. Because
some
I knew
reason,
that you knew that it was going to happen, but nobody else in the game knew
uh,
that it was going to happen or thought that it was going to happen.
I thought after we got into like level 14, I'm like, okay, I know Nick's deal is space, but like right around the time we got into the Underdark, I was like, all right, I don't think we're going to space this time, which kind of bummed me out a little bit because I dig the whole space things that you do. I was like, well, I mean, this is Dungeons and Dragons. How the fuck are we going to get to space anyway? We don't even have fucking cars, so I kind of get it, escape velocity, blah blah blah.
Right,
And
we've
then
had the whole game
suddenly,
built around like pretty low key shit. Like you didn't find magic items everywhere. You didn't there wasn't any high tech stuff that you thought was high tech.
yeah, and then suddenly and without any warning, we had space.
Well, the other thing is I also did give you plenty of warning, which that was part of one of my favorite parts of that whole reveal, where you're sitting there like, wait a minute, does that mean? Wait, oh,
Wait, oh
no, we've
no.
been doing space the whole time.
Yeah, like an entire place that we investigated, he described it as being some kind of spire that's off kilter and it's all made of metal. It's really industrial looking, and I was like, huh, somebody used a lot of magic to make this thing because it's pretty tough. It's well fortified. Too bad the foundation sucks. That's why it tilted over. Come to
Mm-hmm.
find out, it was a goddamn space station, and that's why it was there. Son of a bitch!
Yep, it was so funny. I love doing that kind of
Oh my
thing.
god,
But like,
so much.
but when I started this game, like I did decide that yes, there are other planets, there are stars, like they are the right size stars, because what you could do is you could just have the plane itself like have kind of a skybox deal where stars aren't some giant massive ball of gas, but instead actual like little pinpoints in the sky that you could see sparkling from below. Like maybe once you go, I guess, beyond the sky, you actually enter into another plane instead of just going into space. So for our setting, Xander, I think we've kind of gone about this thinking that there is some kind of cosmos, but we don't, at least with bottom up, we don't have to really extrapolate on all that. Because
Yeah.
one thing that we've kind of been leading towards through the setting creation process is that, like, it doesn't seem like at all in this campaign, this theoretical campaign that we're doing, that the players would ever interact with that kind of thing. Like, there's no space. Probably they wouldn't even go to other planes in this setting, honestly. Um,
Probably not.
it's
There's enough shit to deal with now.
yeah, it's enough stuff. It's already high fantasy. There's a lot of places to explore already, even with just the limited amount of continent that we made. Because you have like at least four entire terrains that you could deal with just within that, and and if it's high fantasy already, you don't really need to add the crazy technology on top of that. Technology is really only a way to bypass things that we can't do normally or to help us get better at them. So if you already have that in terms of magic, you could solve your problems with that. You don't need to solve your problems with computers.
Yeah, a really good example of technology versus abilities and powers and things is to look at, okay, the series is old. If you haven't seen it, I suggest go watching it. But hello, spoiler alert,
For what? What are we talking about?
Full Metal Alchemist series, where they have the ability to transmute pretty much everything that they want. They have some technological advancements, but they don't have a whole lot of it. And at the end of the series, you find out that the two planes of existence, so to speak, one's very high in science and they have great technologies, and the other one they can do transmutation. So they didn't have a need for those kinds of technologies because your society and your people will respond to what they need and use whatever's available. If they don't have the ability to do something, they will make something that will do it for them or make their lives easier, i.e., microwaves, ovens, things like that. All these technologies we use because a campfire out in the backyard, yeah, it tastes good, but you don't want to have campfire food every night, and it's kind of limiting on the things you can do. You can't make a casserole on a campfire.
Or with this high magic setting that we have, like maybe there's just enough people who can heal that nobody ever needed to learn medicine. So
Yeah,
like nobody knows how herbs work and or nobody knows how drugs work because it doesn't matter. Why would you take a pill that might or an antibiotic that might kill all the bacteria that's causing you to be sick? Or you can get the guy who sits in some kind of like a dirt hovel outside of town, and he's just like, I could get rid of that, and then he touches you, and then all of your sickness goes away.
yeah. Or it could be so common that there's a clinic down just about every other street,
Oh, it could
and
even just be household medicine. Like
yeah,
instead of just you take some aspirin when you have a headache, you're just like, Mom, I
I need a
need,
potion.
or Mom, can you cast lesser restoration on me?
Yeah, it's like a second level spell. It's not super hard.
And Mom's like, all right, fine.
Fine.
This is the last spell I have for the day.
Your material components are coming out of your allowance, young man. Oh, God.
Man, maybe the kid would want to learn magic on his own so he doesn't have to pay his mom.
Yeah, but then he'd have to get his material components from his allowance anyway.
Go out in the woods and get those material components.
So, like the dimensions and other planes and stuff like that, we're gonna go ahead and say a soft no, not a hard no, but a soft no
Well,
on this.
bottom up, most of it's
Setting.
soft no's because
Yeah,
because right now it's like no, but maybe if this were an actual campaign and we've been playing for like 6 months and then like somebody wants to try to pick up some kind of plane shift ability and you're like, before I just tell them no, they can't take this spell. I wonder, could I incorporate the planes in some meaningful way? And if you
yeah,
can, then make them up and let the player take that spell or whatever it is they're trying to do. And if there really isn't anything to be gained from that, like both not just from like your imagination, but I'm also talking from like if the player gets the spell and they get to go do the thing. If there's nothing really worth doing, then that's kind of just a waste of a spell for them. So you might just
yeah,
want to might just want to be honest with them and be like, look, the planes weren't really a thing that I thought of, or it wasn't really important. So I don't want you wasting this fifth level spell, like the spell from leveling up to do something that's just not going to be fun.
yeah.
And then maybe you could give some suggestions of what might be better.
Like if the most they're gonna be able to do is go and buy some things from the bazaar in the plane of fire, it's not really worth a fifth level spell. Not
Yeah.
really.
I mean,
So
even with that small example, you don't have to fully flesh out the plane of fire. If you could just decide that, okay, yeah, if somebody wants to buy something from another plane, then maybe planes exist, but instead of having to go to that plane,
other people do that, and you can just go buy it from someone else.
or option two is they come to you. Like, instead
Yeah,
of you
that's
going to
also an
them,
option.
maybe these fire elementals that are freaking people out because they've never seen them before, maybe they're merchants.
They just want to trade some shit, man.
It's just all their shit looks really scary and hot.
I've got all this cool stuff, and no one wants to buy it. No one has any water. Wait, you trading water? I'm from the plane of fire. What the fuck do you think? I can't just go to the plane of water whenever I want. I'm fire.
Or you could also set up like maybe the material plane is the nexus point for the spirits, so your players can't go to other planes, but other planes
But
have
they
to
can come
come to the
here.
material like well not can they have to come here in order to interact with anything that's beyond their plane. Like maybe the plane of fire guy wants to go talk to some plane of water lady, but she can't go straight over to the plane of fire. He can't go straight over to the plane of water. So both of them have to actually go to the material plane and meet up
Meet
there.
halfway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like if I were to come and visit you, but I don't have enough gas to get down there, and you want to come visit me, but you don't have enough gas to get up here, we just meet in Chattanooga. Done.
Sure, yeah, that would not actually ever happen because I'm not gonna use all my gas to get to Chattanooga.
Chattanooga. I don't know anybody in Chattanooga any damn way.
See,
At least I don't think I
it'd be
do.
pointless. But that's not the point of the
Yeah.
example. The example is like just because something already has been established, even in the rule set or the official setting, doesn't mean that you
Mhm.
have to stick with it. Like if it
Yeah.
plays better for your story to have certain things be changed or to have certain things be absent or incredibly rare, then you should do
Or add it
that.
in later on at higher levels when it becomes more relevant, like what
Yeah,
happened with the planes for us in Latier. Like we didn't really have a whole lot to think about or talk about when it came to the plane of fire until, well, we need to do a thing in the plane of fire. I guess we got to figure out how to do that now.
and
So we had to go and
as a
find a bunch of
GM, don't
wizards.
don't introduce plots that involve stuff that you don't have. Like unless you're
Yeah,
prepared to
no.
then make it. So
Yeah,
when my players started asking about like the plane of fire and stuff, they needed to actually go there to get a thing, and I was the
yeah,
one who presented the MacGuffin to tempt you
to
guys
do that.
into realizing you needed to go to the plane of fire to do the thing. Like if you were just
Yeah.
like. If I was like, yeah, you need to get this mystical orb from the plane of fire, and you're like, all right, cool, we're gonna get to the plane of fire, and you're suddenly like, what?
Wait,
Like,
shit.
I
I
wasn't
forgot
prepared
to
for
make
that.
the
So what do you
plane
mean you
fire.
were prepared for that?
You made this, dude. So yeah, multiple dimensions, planes, stuff like that.
I also specifically want to
No.
mention dimensions versus planes because planes I think of like as a unified kind of thing. When I think dimensions, I think of like if you took an entire setting and then put an entire setting next to it, kind of like how DC can cross over with the same characters in DC comics because there's just alternate universes. That's kind of
Yeah,
more what I'm thinking. Like each dimension
yeah,
would have like a plane of fire, but it would be different. Now, you might be
yeah.
getting if you're getting into that level of complication, if you're just playing Rick and Morty, that's cool. Like
Yeah,
that's a lot
that's
of work,
awesome. That's a
but
lot of
it's
goddamn
a
work for
lot of
you,
work. But
dude.
you could keep that. You could do that if you want.
You can make that shit happen if you got the time and the motherfucking patience. Like I write a lot. I make a lot in the world. 90% of the shit that I create using my method is never seen by the players, and I'm okay with that. But I would still never Rick and Morty that shit. That's too much even for me.
Yeah, even when
No.
dude, I still regret the I think the second or third Halloween episode I think it was where you guys played League of Legends.
Yeah, that was difficult to interact
That
with.
that was difficult to interact with because I fell into the trap that I accidentally or that I mentioned earlier in this podcast, which was I came up with something cool that I wanted them to do, and then when they started needing extrapolation, then I was like, uh-oh, because
Oh
it was
shit.
supposed to be like a one-shot setting that you're supposed to deal with once and then not ever go back to.
Yeah.
But the problem was the
We
way
were
that the
trying to
players were
figure out
thinking.
how.
You're trying to figure out how it interacted with everything else and like coming up with theories and stuff. And that's when I had to actually consciously just say, we got to hit the brakes. Hold on, because
All right,
it was getting
nothing's
real out
fair.
of control real quick, and I didn't want it to get too side tangenty.
Yeah, like we were coming up with theories about how the main villain entire campaign was behind this, and he's causing these troubles because these reasons, and it's going to gain him this, and we were like all this, and Nick was like, all right, hold up,
Yeah, hold up. This is a
just so you
Halloween
guys
episode.
know, you're never going to interact with this. Pharaohdrax has got nothing to do with this. This is just supposed to be a one shot done, and you guys are done.
Yeah,
You
that's
guys are
what
thinking too hard.
I
And we're
laid
like,
that out
oh,
like verbatim. It
fuck.
was just like, all right, hold on. Okay, the main villain has nothing to do with this. He will not have anything to do with this. Trust me, just don't bother with it. He's not interacting with it. You're not interacting with it again. Just have fun with what I've presented, please.
And then we were like, oh, okay. And then we went from there
The
and
game
figured it
did
out.
become all right. So the game did become a lot better once I actually said that because then everybody had
Yeah,
a mindset of how to approach the problem. Like
yeah,
then you guys realized that yes, it is a contained thing that we don't have to try to connect a bunch of different dots together for, and the puzzle pieces all fit together within only what I presented you. And
yeah.
at that point, I think people had more fun. I still screwed up that game like a lot, but it was an
Yeah,
experiment that went wrong.
I,
At
it,
least it didn't derail an entire campaign.
yeah, it was still quite a bit of fun, and it was definitely a learning experience. Take notes, ladies and gentlemen, that no GM is perfect. You are going to make mistakes. Be okay with that and learn from it. Move on, and all that jazz. And you're going to make mistakes when you're designing your world. That is absolutely going to happen.
You bring me a GM that says they are perfect or that there are perfect GMs. Like,
No, that doesn't
no,
happen.
that's a challenge. I straight up challenge you.
Yeah, do it.
Find
Tell
me
me.
somebody who legitimately says that and not just says it for the sake of contradicting me.
Yeah, no, it's like I don't make mistakes as a GM. Oh, you're fucking lying. Yeah, I know. Are
Yeah,
you
if you're
fucking
just being
kidding me?
contradictory, but I mean, like, does anyone legit say that? Because I would really be curious.
I don't know any perfect GMs, and if I ever come across a perfect GM, I would always play in their campaign, like straight up, straight down.
I mean, they'd be perfect, so why wouldn't you? And
Yeah,
so,
that's
really,
a great.
the last thing that I can think of that really you want to kind of flesh out before you could just go hog wild with whatever else you think of is this kind of goes a little bit back to the gods and the other metaphysics, but it needs its own place. And this last point that we want to talk about is are good and evil present in your setting? And when I mean present in your setting, I don't mean like there's some kind of abstract thing like good and evil in real life where there's different interpretations or different like what one person considers good, another person might consider evil. I'm talking about like are these hard rules in your setting? Is good a tangible thing that you can measure somebody by? Like if I do this, and this, I am a good person. Or if I do this, don't do this, do this, am I an evil person? And you want to ask yourself that because depending, especially with systems, Dungeons and Dragons, I don't know how well they stick with this and fit that, but in previous editions, and I think still now, good and evil are objective things. Like, this action is
Yeah,
good, this action
this
is
actually
bad, always, no matter what. If that's important to what you need as a setting, especially if you have players that are playing like paladins or you're doing an evil campaign, then you need to know what they need to know what they can do to best fit their own alignment and their own personality as a character. You can't have just the
yeah.
abstractness come in, like, unless it's a setting that kind of is built for that. So Shadowrun is it does have a lot more of that, like where it is an intangible thing where you don't necessarily you have different scores for how your I guess your morals work really, but that's more about like how heroic or how much you fucked over everybody else has been, and not like I didn't help this person. I didn't stop this person from bleeding out. I'm an evil person now. You really just want to have that idea out there so that way you're not blindsiding the players with it. If suddenly somebody realizes what they're doing is evil, then they could stop and then be like, "Wait a minute, hold on. We might not want to do this." But if it's abstract and you're not sure, then maybe the quote unquote lawful good paladin might look the other way when like the rogue has to stab somebody to steal something from them. Like, if it's a hard and fast rule, then if he knowingly turns away because something bad might happen, that's an evil act. But if it's abstracted, then maybe it's not.
And keeping in mind the setting that you're working with, a lot of these settings out there, evil and good are they're not tangible. They are abstract. Like a really good example is World of Darkness. Evil is kind of what you make it, but it doesn't really affect your characters beyond I think like willpower or
But it's still
there's some
tangible within the
mechanics.
setting, though. So, like,
Yeah,
there are mechanics for it. If you murder somebody out of cold blood, that drops you in morality. But that doesn't necessarily make you evil because if you murder a bad person in cold blood, you still have to take a hit or roll
yeah,
on the morality table. So,
yeah,
but in other more concrete examples, if you take like the most violent weapon you can think of, but you end an evildoer's life with it, that could always be considered good. But
yeah,
if you bring it to anyone else who isn't explicitly evil, then that could be counted as an evil action. It's
yeah.
more about clarity with how you want players to interact with your system and I mean setting, rather than trying to shoehorn them into doing certain things. Because at the end of the day, if you do try to list out what's good and what's evil, your list are going to be what you mean. One of your lists might be as long as one of Xander's campaign notes, maybe.
Maybe, maybe. Let's maybe that.
That's a hard maybe.
Yeah. So for our setting, what are you thinking? Tangible or more
I
abstract?
think abstract, because just the way what we've interacted with so far and the kind of factions we put in, it seems like this would just be better as a more abstract setting. You don't really have to explain it too much beyond that point, unless I mean, Xander, you usually like to explain more than that. So, what do you think?
I think that actually sticking with it being more abstract means that the gods are less held by an alignment, and the players are less held by an alignment too. What is an evil act can be loosely defined by the character's morals, and where those morals come from can be built upon the life that they've led. Like a thief who, in order to survive, and has done just there's nothing that they could do
I
with
mean, they had to
their
make some
life
hard
beyond it.
choices. We get
They've
that.
had to make some hard choices. Same thing with an assassin that was born into like an assassin's guild, and they were raised from an infant to do nothing more than just be sent to kill people. They don't feel like what they're doing is evil. They feel like what they're doing is necessary, even if it might not be the best thing to do. So
Hmm.
I think it should be left to be more of a
So for
what's
our
your
setting,
perception of it?
our setting is going to be perception. But yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that assassin thing is actually a really good example to think of if you're trying to decide between both of them. Because
Hmm.
if you do have concrete good and evil, then if this assassin person does grow up killing a bunch of people, then yes, they are evil, and most likely they know they are evil, and
They
also
are
most
very well
likely
aware.
they are enjoying it. So
Yeah.
like that's one of the other things is like when evil is present as an actual tangible thing, then players side with evil, or not players, characters side with evil. So they won't say I'm doing this because like I have to. It's like in order to save my family, etc., etc. It's like I'm doing this because I'm a bad person and I like hurting people. Like that's their explanation. That's all the explanation they need. When in more abstract setting, you might need to extrapolate a bit more about the motivations and like
Yeah.
how this affects them psychologically. But if good and evil is an inherent power in the universe, then the more good somebody does, the better they feel, the more good they know they are, and the more they fight for
Yeah.
the concept of good rather than their idea of it.
Yeah. A good example of kind of this abstract morality. If you everybody's if you have played Fallout 4, if you plan to, minor spoiler here, there is a DLC where you have to go to Nuka World, and the way you get there is you're effectively tricked into going by a guy who has no other choice but to trick you into going. Otherwise, people that he cares about is going to die. What he's doing is bad. It's mean, it's cruel, but he's doing it for reasons that he can't help. And if he doesn't do it, or if he fails, the things that he cares about are in jeopardy and they are important to him. So that abstractness really kind of makes the choices of whether or not you should be angry with or fight against another person in any particular game setting a little more muddy water. Do you kill him because he's trying to trick you into going into some place that's going to get you killed, at least in his mind, or do you kind of give him a free pass because his kid and his wife are literally going to have their throats slit if he doesn't bring you back? So
But you could also
it,
flip that on its head, like in the actual Fallout. Yeah, that's how it is. But let's say Fallout
yeah,
had. Well, I mean, I guess it does have karma, but let's say it has D&D good and evil.
yeah,
So if this guy did the same thing, then if we
he would
did
be
apply
enjoying
that,
what he's doing.
well, or not even that. Let's think about it from a different angle. So
Okay.
he does an evil act. He knows that is an evil act, but then he realizes, you know what? If I trick like 5 people, that outweighs my family because let's say he does do the good thing and it's like, hey, this is a trap, don't get on this boat or whatever, and then the bad guys slit their family's throats. Now in a setting like D&D, that yeah, it's bad, it's heartbreaking, but they have souls, and since they are good people and since he did the good thing by not tricking people, then in the afterlife they get to go to heaven and live in paradise. Since it's not a thing that you know for certain about in an abstract reality, then yeah, you get the harder choices. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Like, if you know that you're going to go someplace where the you're going to be living in paradise for all of your the rest of your energy's lifetime, or however the hell that works, or eternity, if that's what you pull for, then yeah, doing a good thing, sacrificing yourself for the greater good, knowing that you'll be rewarded later on, is a perfectly applicable thing. So using the same situation can have differing uh, effects. It can have differing ways for you to write your campaigns. If you want to make it abstract, then it makes your player characters they have to
It
make some
makes your
harder
players
choices.
think a little more. That's why I
Yeah.
typically go with abstract.
Oh yeah, that's totally why I do it too. Because I love that thinking process. Like, yeah, this guy's bad, but fuck, he's got a good goddamn point.
Yeah.
And I kind of agree with the point. He's just kind of going about it in a shitty way. But I also understand that there's really no other fucking way to do it but to do it shitty. Because nobody will listen otherwise. Fuck.
Yep.
Moral conundrums for everyone.
And that's it for bottom up world design. The Designing a World miniseries hasn't reached its conclusion yet, but because we still have to build a world through the top down method, which I know Xander's excited about,
Oh, yeah.
we're going to be starting that process from scratch. So if you're interested in more podcasts, subscribe to Starblade, and we'll see you next time on Playing God.
Later, man.